B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, September 26, 2019. Major developments in the Ukrainian phone call whistleblower scandal that has got Washington all a-Twitter. And, you know, a Twitter actually is a word that predates the Twitter platform. But they're tweeting like mad as well. So today, major developments. Joseph Maguire, retired admiral and the acting director of national intelligence, testified before the House Intelligence Committee. And almost simultaneously, the White House released a redacted version of the whistleblower complaint letter. So we're getting a much bigger picture of this whole flap. And let me offer a couple of quick comments here at the start. Number one, I've watched about 40 minutes of the testimony of Maguire. I've got more work to do on that this evening, but my comments today are based on what I've heard so far. And I maintain my position that the Democrats have gone too far too fast by identifying this Ukraine scandal as the central focus or maybe even exclusive focus of their now expanded impeachment efforts. And I will explain. So first up to the whistleblower complaint letter. Dated August 12, 2019, it was addressed to the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, and the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. And it opens by citing the legal framework. I am reporting an urgent concern under 50 U.S.C. 3033K5A. We've all read that section. That's the whistleblower portion of federal law. And let me explain here as well that the experience of whistleblowers, particularly those in the national security part of the government, has not been pretty over the years. So this is a high-ranking official, we are told, who in the course of his or her official duties, I'm quoting now, I have received information from multiple U.S. government officials that the President of the United States is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 election. It includes, among other things, pressuring a foreign country to investigate one of the President's main domestic political rivals. The President's personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, is a central figure. Attorney General Barr appears to be involved as well. So that is the summary claim right there. And it's damaging to Donald Trump. It is a serious allegation. When you couple it with what are alleged efforts to bury the transcript of this phone call and other records related to the communication, and what we can now see is a bigger effort on the part of Trump and Giuliani to squeeze information out of Ukraine, ramping up the effort once Zelensky, with one or two Ys, you choose, was elected in April. So I do not want to dismiss in any way or mischaracterize that these are serious charges that the president should answer for. My biggest complaint is that this is not a simple, cut and dried, open and shut door case, as the Democrats represented as recently as yesterday. And that this will be easy to sell to the average American as gross misconduct by this president. Because it's more complicated. There's he said, she said. There's bad behavior on both sides. There's at minimum, the optics of Joe Biden's son, Hunter, getting $50,000 a month to serve on a board in Ukraine. And you know that is not divorced from the fact that he's the son of a sitting vice president at that time. So the Democrats scored some big points. I'll outline some more of them in a moment. But it's fair to say that the Republicans scored points as well. because in the third paragraph, or I guess it's the fourth after the legal stipulations at the beginning, the whistleblower, whose identity remains unknown to me and I believe to Trump, despite Trump's attack on this person, the whistleblower admits, quote, "I was not a direct witness to most of the events described. However, I found my colleagues' accounts of these events to be credible because in almost all cases, multiple officials recounted fact patterns that were consistent with one another. In addition, a variety of information consistent with these private accounts has been reported publicly." But the Republicans can undermine the whistleblower's credibility. They've already attacked the partisan hack. As I say, we don't even know who this person is. And the fact that it is not firsthand is going to weaken the case that the Democrats are pressing. So I'm reading from the complaint letter now, and it opens with a description of the presidential phone call, Trump to Zelensky, on the 25th of July. After initial pleasantries, Trump used the remainder of the call to advance his personal interests. He sought to pressure the Ukrainian leader to take actions to help the president's 2020 re-election bid. According to the White House officials who had direct knowledge of the call. So he or she is quoting the people who have firsthand knowledge. The president pressured Zelensky to initiate or continue an investigation into the activities of Biden and his son Hunter, assist in purportedly uncovering that allegations of Russian interference in 2016 originated in Ukraine, and it appears they're referring primarily to the release of the ledger book, the handwritten ledger book, that showed that Paul Manafort and his buddies had received millions of dollars from the Yanukovych campaign, much of it in cash. And that led to his separation from the Trump campaign. And apparently Trump has long nursed this grievance that it was Democrats in league with Ukrainians who facilitated that disclosure that led to, well, the exit of Manafort and the entry of Steve Bannon to the Trump campaign in 2016. Next up, the whistleblower says, the White House officials who told me this information were deeply disturbed by what had transpired in the phone call. They told me there was already a discussion ongoing with White House lawyers about how to treat the call because of the likelihood that they had witnessed the president abuse his office for personal gain. Now, keep in mind, these are Trump loyalists. I don't know about the whistleblower. We still don't know about the political persuasion or legacy of that person. But it's safe to assume that it's somebody who was a Republican appointed by Trump. Again, quoting the whistleblower complaint, Trump expressed his conviction that the new Ukrainian government will be able to quickly, this is from the readout on the Ukrainian side of the call, that the government will be able to quickly improve Ukraine's image and complete the investigation of corruption cases that have held back cooperation between Ukraine and the United States. So we do know from this statement by the whistleblower that he or she is not in the White House. Quote, I was not the only non-White House official to receive a readout of this call. Then the complaint delves into the handling inside the White House, and to simplify it, this call was recorded in a confidential or classified online filing system, and it should have been in a less secure one, and the suggestion is this is a cover-up. That is certainly serious and worthy of investigation. Then the complaint says that Ambassadors Volker and Sondland reportedly provided advice to the Ukrainian leadership about how to navigate the demands that the president have made of Zelensky, and essentially saying you must be confused about what you get in official channels and what you get in private channels. So then there's the recall of the U.S. ambassador, a career State Department person, Marie Yovanovitch. And this gets into the issues related to Trump's support for the Ukrainian prosecutor general at the time, whose name is Lutsenko. I'm sorry, that's not his first name necessarily, but his name is Lutsenko. And this becomes crucial, all right? Keep in mind Lutsenko. He was the most recent prosecutor general. Viktor Shokin was his predecessor, who was fired by Poroshenko at the behest of Joe Biden. So I hope you can keep these two Ukrainians separate, Lutsenko and Shokin. Because what we learn next is that Trump and Giuliani were encouraging the new president of Ukraine to keep Lutsenko on the job because he had made public statements supporting the Trump allegation of the Ukrainian interference with members of the Clinton campaign that led to the exposure of Manafort's payments and his immediate, rather abrupt departure from the campaign in 2016. Now, the other major complaint of the whistleblower, which again is very serious, is that Rudy Giuliani, who was referenced multiple times in the phone call between Trump and Zelensky, he has no standing with the federal government. He doesn't have a security clearance. He's not a special envoy or any other assigned role. And so for him to be authorized by Trump to make contact with officials in the Ukrainian government blurs the line between official and private activities. And Giuliani has had meetings with Ukrainian officials where he presses them on behalf of Trump for his personal interests, not for the interests of the U.S. government. And that, coupled with the others, makes this a very serious case against Trump. But will it stick? Based on the hearing today, Joe Maguire, the former Navy admiral who is the accidental acting director of National Intelligence, he appeared like a tool. He was seriously constrained by Trump, by the legal opinion of the Barr Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, and he had a tough assignment. I would not have wanted to be Joe Maguire at that hearing today. So he deflected many of the charges that he broke the law by failing to pass along the whistleblower complaint as required by law within 7 days after he received it. But he said, gosh, this is unprecedented. It wasn't clear to me that the president, the central figure here, is under my jurisdiction as the director of national intelligence. And I get this opinion from the OLC that says I don't have to send the complaint over. Maguire says he referred it to the FBI and the Justice Department as a potential violation of campaign laws. And at the end of the hearing, which is the part that I saw, Adam Schiff was praising him as a fine, loyal American. And his deflections and Trump's Teflon, in many ways, carried the day for the Trump side. Here's a quote from exchanges between Schiff and Maguire. Schiff, you don't believe the whistleblower is a political hack? Maguire, I believe the whistleblower is operating in good faith and has followed the law. Schiff circles back a few minutes later. Do you have any reason to accuse him of her of disloyalty to the country or suggest that he or she is beholden to anything else but the country? Maguire, absolutely not. But that doesn't stop Trump, who, in a session before he left the United Nations today, told a group of employees, federal employees assembled, that this is obviously the work of a hack and said that the person is a spy. or compared the person to being a spy, and hinted that we used to execute spies. He didn't say execute, but we used to deal with them in a different way, and shouldn't we return to those glory days? So, between Trump's reflexive lying and cover-up, Rudy Giuliani's freelancing, the clear effort to extract information that could be used against Biden in a campaign, these are serious issues. But I still don't see that this leads to a slam dunk article of impeachment that will pass the House with even one Republican vote and then go to the Senate, where it might even be quashed before they even hold a hearing. Mitch McConnell could kill the articles of impeachment using parliamentary procedure and eliminate any possibility of a Senate trial, even though we know the votes aren't there to remove Trump. Then again, Mitch McConnell could go forward with a trial in the Senate, believing that it would help Republicans at the ballot next November. Now, the New York Times, based on the disclosure of this document, has a persuasive article today that this is not one instance. This is a long-running effort. And that by trying to lock down the records of this phone call, they were trying to engage in a cover-up and keep us from learning how Giuliani has been on this effort for almost a year now. And then we get into the issue of whether there was a quid pro quo. And I saw Democrats in the hearings today straining, saying that they could detect coded language between Trump and Zelensky, and that they were bargaining between the release of funds that Zelensky didn't know were being withheld and the quid pro quo, the payoff for the president, which would have been dirt on Biden. And I don't see that as a provable conspiracy. I believe it, but can you prove it? And in impeachment, we don't have the same precise standards of guilty beyond reasonable doubt. But you have to be able to persuade a substantial chunk of the American people in order to force their elected leaders to go along with it. And an impeachment that is purely based on Democratic votes in the House, that's not going to go very far. And that's why I believe that focusing on this one single issue is a serious mistake. So here is a summary by Charlie Savage in the New York Times of 8 takeaways from the whistleblower complaint. Number 1, there were White House officials who thought they had seen Trump abuse his power for personal gain. Number 2, those lawyers tried to hide the call records. Number 3, the State Department saw Giuliani's rogue outreach to Ukraine as a threat to national security. Number 4, Trump's push for investigations coincided with a sudden change of policy with respect to U.S. assistance to Ukraine. That's based on the phrase from the whistleblower about whether Zelensky was going to play ball or not. Number 5, a widely criticized Ukrainian prosecutor became the interest of Trump and Giuliani by floating allegations. And I talked about those related to the release of the ledger book that insinuated the cash payments, not necessarily payoffs, payments to Manafort. Number 6, the whistleblower raised concerns about Bill Barr's involvement. He has denied everything, saying that the president has never instructed him to investigate the Bidens. He's a man you can't always believe. Number 7, the Inspector General kept the whistleblower's identity secret. That's true. And number 8, the Inspector General flagged mitigating information but concluded the complaint was urgent and credible and therefore had to be shared with the congressional intelligence committees. And then 4 different reporters at the Times filed a story today that talks about a nearly year-long free-ranging effort to unearth information in Ukraine, and that this was heightened when Zelensky was elected on April 21st, that the focus on Ukraine started after a law enforcement organization in Ukraine released damaging information about those payments to Manafort by the Yanukovych campaign, and that Manafort stayed in contact with Trump after he was bumped from the campaign. During the transition, Manafort told people he was discussing possible investigations with Trump's team into whether Ukrainians tried to undermine the Trump campaign in this manner. So there is a substantial and long-running effort by Trump et al. To get information out of Ukraine they thought would help them get elected, or at least embarrass political opponents. And the Washington Post has a good point that because Zelensky, in his phone call with Trump, bragged that he had stayed in New York near Central Park. I stayed at the Trump Tower. Now, at first I thought he was referring to the building where Trump lives in the penthouse, but there is a Trump International Hotel at number 1 Central Park Way, and that appears to be where Zelensky stayed. But this raises new concerns about violations of the Emoluments Clause by foreign officials, and that was explicitly what the Constitution was addressing. I asked you to keep in mind Yuri, I got his name now, Yuri Lutsenko, the former prosecutor general in Ukraine. And get this very narrowly framed non-denial denial that he issued today. He said, referring to Hunter Biden, that he didn't run afoul of any laws in Ukraine. Quote, from the perspective of Ukrainian legislation, he did not violate anything. Now, I don't think anybody's ever accused Hunter Biden of violating laws. He's a beneficiary of nepotism, but it's his father, who was the vice president of the United States, who threatened the Ukrainian government at the time that he would withhold $1 billion if they didn't fire the previous prosecutor general, not Lutsenko, but Shokin. So I still find it amazing that the corporate media in this country is giving Joe Biden a pass. They ignore the serious questions of at least a perception of conflict of interest with Joe Biden's son getting $50,000 a month from this Ukrainian energy company for serving on its board. And so Shokin, we haven't heard from him. He has not exonerated Hunter Biden or Joe Biden. And here's a very inconvenient article, actually an op-ed published yesterday at the Washington Post, under the byline of right-wing op-ed writer Mark Thiessen. And this is painful to report to you. In May, CNN reported that Senator Robert Menendez, Dick Durbin, and Patrick Leahy, all Democrats, wrote a letter to Yuri Lutsenko, Ukraine's prosecutor general, expressing concern that Lutsenko had closed 4 investigations they said were critical to the Mueller probe. They implied their support for U.S. assistance to Ukraine was at stake. Yeah, they threatened to cut off U.S. money to Ukraine. Here's a quote from that letter. We've supported the capacity-building process and are disappointed that some in Kyiv appear to have cast aside democratic principles to avoid the ire of President Trump. So Thiessen has a very important argument here. The Democrats do not have clean hands, starting with Joe Biden, but more recently, these 3 knuckleheads who wrote this letter. And Thiessen goes on, he says, then there's Joe Biden, who threatened to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees if the government didn't fire Victor Shokin. Among those who had a stake in the outcome was Hunter Biden. That's a quote from the James Risen article I quoted the other day. And Biden bragged about getting the guy fired. And over the last weekend, Biden told reporters, "I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings," and Thiessen concludes this is flatly untrue. Hunter admitted in an interview with The New Yorker that his father expressed concern about the Burisma post at least once. Quote, "Dad said, 'I hope you know what you're doing.' And I said, 'I do.'" Then The New Yorker has also reported in December of 2015, as Joe Biden prepared to return to Ukraine, his aides braced for renewed scrutiny of Hunter's relationship with Burisma. Obama's special envoy for energy policy, Amos Hochstein, raised the matter with Biden. So for Biden to say that this has never come up before and that they're all squeaky clean does not make sense. Today I'm releasing a fresh in-depth interview with a former soldier who's become a sharp critic of American military and foreign policy, DNI Maguire. And you can hear this comment in the in-depth interview before we got into the focus of the interview, which is a recent piece that Sershin wrote about his own odyssey from a dedicated American soldier to a sharp critic. But I asked him to comment on this newly inspired impeachment effort driven by the Ukraine-gate scandal. Am I the first to call it that? Here's Danny Serson.
You know, I have some provocative thoughts on impeachment coming from the left, as I tend to do. I thought Russiagate was a fraud. I didn't think there was any there when it came to actual collusion. I think this matter about Ukraine and the Bidens is serious. And it may well reach the threshold of misdemeanors or high crimes, if I've got those backwards. But I think impeachment is a terrible idea. I think it's the wrong path. I think Trump needs to be defeated at the ballot box, and he needs to be defeated handily so he'll actually leave power, scarily. I think that's necessary. His people will not abandon him. You know, he accurately said that, you know, he could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue, of course, and they wouldn't leave him behind. I think this makes the Democrats look desperate. I think it's an end run to trying to defeat Trump. It bothers me because it's futile in the first place. I mean, they're not going to remove this president in the Senate. They need 67 votes, and the Republicans have, 52 or 53 senators, and it's just not going to happen. I mean, this is the era of Mitch McConnell. I mean, this is the McConnell era. He is not going to allow his people to remove Trump. And so what I fear is they're going to throw all their eggs in this basket, distract attention from the real issues that should be getting talked about, at least in the primary debates that are ongoing and exhausting. And if anything, they're going to hand a second term to Trump. And the other thing that gets me is this is bad, right? This scandal is serious, but it's no more serious than a whole bunch of other things Trump has done before that are potentially worse. You know, support for Yemen. Of course, Obama did that too. The war in Yemen, the border policy. I mean, thing after thing, the overreach of executive power that not only Trump but the whole system is capable of. So, you know, I just finished a piece today, you know, that I cranked out, you know, in lieu of what's going on, and I called it, you know, you guys can read it at Truthdig in the next few days. It's called, you know, Impeach the System, not Trump. So that's kind of my thoughts on the whole process.
You can hear my full conversation with Danny Serson. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, most places where you find the podcast. And this is all made possible by subscribers like Jim Garrison, Cliff Johnson, Carl Howard, Ted Kelly. They all kick in $5, $10, $20 a month to support my work, and I need you to do it too. I've lost a few subscribers because of my strong opinions that are not always consistent with the mainstream, and I'd like you to jump in and pick up the slack there. Visit peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and you can make an excellent choice from there on the level of support that's comfortable for you. Progressive groups are excited by this renewed impeachment effort, and they're disappointed that the House is about to embark on another 2-week recess. I mean, they just got back. And they're encouraging Pelosi to cancel that time off. And we've heard that impeachment is so distracting that the Congress won't be able to do anything. Well, they're not doing anything anyway, and they're not going to pass any of the legislation that Democrats pass out of the House over in the Senate. But they have managed to put a Band-Aid on the budget and approve a spending measure. It's stinky, but it buys them 60 days until mid-November without a government shutdown. And finally, while we have been obsessed with what's going on in this country, there was a powerful speech during one of the final sessions of the UN General Assembly this week, and it came from Hassan Rouhani, the president of Iran. And he said, "Our region is on the edge of collapse. A single blunder can fuel a big fire. Security shall not be supplied with American weapons and intervention. Security cannot be purchased or supplied by foreign governments. Iran will never negotiate with an enemy that seeks to make Iran surrender with the weapon of poverty. Stop the sanctions so as to open the way for the start of negotiations." I'll bet not a single American heard that. And before we play Happy Trails, I want to bring you another clip from my in-depth interview with Danny Serson, who talks about when he was given an unachievable mission in Iraq and in Afghanistan. In order to protect the lives of his troops, he did what he called phoning it in. Take a listen.
My focus became, how can I do two things? Most importantly, how can I get as many of my kids out of here with all their limbs and their lives? And the second thing was, how can I do that while also respecting the local people whose country this is and treating them with as much dignity and as little harm as possible? So, it became a mission of mine, and it often involved blatant lies and also, equivocation with my bosses. I mean, I would avoid certain missions. I would argue against others. I would phone in certain patrols and only do the bare minimum if I knew that it was futile and that it was going to get somebody killed. It didn't always work. I mean, 8 soldiers died under my command, some by suicide, but I did lose a lot of soldiers directly under my command in combat, plus, dozens wounded. So obviously I wasn't perfect at it, but I like to think, and I think what I thought at the time was, it's better that they have me as the commander because I'll lie a little and I'll put my career on the line and I'll do everything possible to keep them alive, because I know, unlike their other commanders, most of whom are true believers or just, sociopaths who want to get promoted, unlike them, I felt, well, I know the war's wrong and I'll try to keep them alive. So that's what I told myself, but here's what would happen. Then I'd get back from the war, and I have all this free time, and that's when the frustration would come in, right, and the guilt about what I had done and what I didn't do. And
that's Danny Serson. He's in the in-depth interview available for subscribers today here at peterbcollins.com. Thanks for listening to this news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. You're free to share it all over the place, and I'm still Peter B.
Happy trails to you until again. Happy trails to